Alright nerds, so we're going to try a new video format. Up until now I've been doing video essays, mostly because that's really what my favorite content creators do. But I'm going to go more off the cuff today, and we are going to do current events and cultural news coverage in literature for the month of October. So I've been saving videos and articles and tweets and things that I think are interesting from the past month, and I'm going to go through those today and discuss them. It's going to be a way for you to get news about what is going on in the literary world, and it's going to be a way for me to share my thoughts in a less structured way. So there's going to be three main things that I want to talk about today. So we have a new Jack Edwards video on ghostwriting, so I'm going to talk about him, booktubers overall, my thoughts and feelings on the state of booktube. We also have an interview from Chimamanda Adichie, a very reactionary interview that she gave to The Atlantic, in which she claims that curiosity is leaving the literary world for not just readers, but also writers. So we're going to get into the literary culture war, which, if you don't know, is actively raging. And then for the final segment, we're going to talk about the Literature Prize awards that were announced this week. We have a Nobel Prize winner, we have the shortlist for the National Book Award, and the shortlist for the Booker Prize. That segment is going to be coverage, and then mostly talking about the cultural relevance of literary awards at this point. Cool, let's get into the first bit. What we have here is a new video from Jack Edwards about the ethics of ghostwriting. And if you don't know who Jack Edwards is, he is a booktuber, but he's really the booktuber. He has an incredible amount of subs. I mean, he has 1.3 million, which for Booktube is a tremendous amount of subs. And you might be wondering, well, how did he accomplish this? And the answer is that he doesn't really talk about actual book content really all that much. Like most booktubers, what he's doing is lifestyle content disguised as book content. So you can see that he calls himself YouTube's resident librarian. He has things like, I turned my house into a bookshop, building a library stuff, book haul posts, Drake's poetry book. I mean, a lot of kind of content tangentially related to books, but not necessarily about literature or reading. I personally do not really like this type of content. It's actually the main reason that I decided to start a channel, is because when I went on YouTube, I couldn't really find anyone talking about the types of things that I like to read in a way that I found interesting. Though there is a part of me that does not like Jack Edwards, I definitely don't hate him. And I think that he makes a lot of content that actually is about reading, and his opinions are generally pretty fair and well thought out and smart. So I'm not gonna like trash him entirely. I don't think he's like fully a lifestyle vlogger or anything like that. There are definitely a lot of those that I'm not going to name in this video, but I don't think that Jack Edwards really falls into that headliner. Alright, so the video itself is 45 minutes. It's pretty long. I do think it's interesting. Go watch it if you want to. I'll summarize it, but definitely go check it out. It's definitely worth the watch. But the video itself primarily focuses on Millie Bobby Brown's newest book, which is 19 Steps. It is a New York Times bestseller, and it was written by Millie Bobby Brown, which means that it was ghostwritten. So you can see here that it says Millie Bobby Brown with Kathleen McGurl. So she is giving some credit to the ghostwriter, and that's really what Jack Edwards' video is all about. So to summarize the video before getting into my thoughts on it, Edwards concludes that ghostwriting is ultimately ethical as long as expectations are aligned on the writer side and the reader side. Edwards calls ghostwriting a necessary evil for a couple of reasons. He says that it gets money into the publishing industry, which is absolutely critical for creating the types of books that more literary readers might actually like to read. He also says that these books get readers more interested in reading and bring new readers into the pipeline, which might ultimately lead them to literary fiction, which in turn creates more business for literary fiction, I guess. So I have a handful of thoughts on this. So the first is that, Edwards works in the publishing industry. Publishing is a brutal industry. There's an element of, I don't want to say brainwashing, but brainwashing that comes with being inside an industry and really believing it. He seems to be approaching this from a very business-oriented attitude. I am not surprised that he has such a sympathetic edge towards ghostwriting. We also spent a lot of time in this video talking about books in history that might have been ghostwritten that would surprise you and things along those lines, and he kind of highlights how prevalent ghostwriting is. He talks about the Prince Harry book, the Phil Knight book. I'm just going to shatter the illusion here for anyone that doesn't know. Every single book that is not by a literary author is pretty much ghostwritten. If you have a book that is by your favorite celebrity that you think isn't ghostwritten, you are probably wrong. ghostwriting is insanely prevalent. Something that I think people kind of miss overall is that having a natural and creative voice that is unique and recognizable is the really challenging aspect of creating something. Imitating a unique voice that already exists is actually relatively easy compared to creating one. So in terms of Edward's overall approach, I think he definitely has too sympathetic of an edge, way more than I do. And I'll talk through the specifics of his arguments in a second, but I do think that in general, his idea that it's all fair as long as it's clearly stated is a very nice idea, but what he considers to be clearly stated is definitely not the reality of most ghostwritten books. The reality is that most incredibly popular ghostwritten books are hiding the ghostwriter entirely. All right, so getting to the specifics.
This book was pumping money into the industry. An industry that she loves, that I love, that hopefully you love, the publishing industry. And that is, I think, maybe the most important point. Celebrity books make money. Even if you hate them, they are a necessary evil for the publishing industry because it pumps money into it. It pumps.
Yeah, so this is where I think Jack Edwards being in the publishing industry comes into play. I don't really care if HarperCollins or Penguin have an arm that makes billions of dollars and then an arm that makes a couple million a year if I'm only concerned with the one that makes a couple million a year. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, these organizations could just be sets of smaller businesses with smaller capacity that are earning less money. This idea that you need as big of a conglomerate as possible in order to produce artistic work, I mean, it just doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, these like ghost-ridden types of celebrity books, I don't really see them as being part of the core art form of what constitutes literature. They're just not relevant to me. Another point that I would add to this, and we'll talk about this later in the prizes section, but a really good example of a publishing house that is earning a lot of money and doing well for themselves is Fitzcarraldo, who just took home their 4th Nobel Prize winner as of this year with Jon Fosse. I look at a house like this and they publish 12 books every year, which is absolutely an insanely small amount. And they've only been around since like 2014. So this to me is just living proof that you don't need to be a Penguin or to publish thousands of different books across thousands of different categories and genres in order to earn money. The existence of publishing houses like this kind of negates Edward's point to me. But ultimately, like, I get his point. I don't think it's like the worst point in the world. I do think he makes other worse points in this video.
Industry because it pumps money into it. It pumps money into bookstores, into publishing houses. They can also get people who aren't currently into reading to go out and buy a book because they're into the celebrity who wrote it, and reading one good book can genuinely make you a reader for life. It's just about flexing that muscle and getting back into the habit of reading. And so if celebrities like these can do that, I'm all here for it.
This is a point that I actually just don't think is right. And I don't know, maybe he's aware of some statistic that I'm not aware of, but the flat reality of it is that I don't believe that the types of readers that enter through celebrity books and continue to read are necessarily reading the same types of books that I like. It's not that I don't think that people reading is a good thing, you know, I do. But reading can be a couple different things. It can be an incredible art form that brings a lot of imagination, creativity to us, that tells us empathetic stories that we can't get through other media forms. But it can also just be a long form medium for stories that could also have been a YouTube video or an article or a TV show or something like that. A reality TV show written in like book form is not necessarily more intelligent than the reality TV show version of it. So I think it's great that people are reading, sure, but at the same time, I really just don't care. I don't care if people are reading celebrity books. I don't think it's going to convert them in mass into readers of like great literary fiction. I think that's a huge stretch. So that's just not a point that I think is very convincing, honestly.
Also excitement around the act of reading, which is all we can ask for.
So that's not really all that I can ask for as a reader. I honestly think that these types of celebrity books train readers to be uncritical. They get them used to mediocrity, and I think that it degrades the quality of writing that we see overall by degrading people's expectations of what good writing is and should be. This is actually the same problem that I have really with lifestyle YouTubers overall. What I really want out of the reading world is a younger generation of readers that are highly, highly critical and demand really high quality. I think that criticism is the lifeblood of creating good artwork. I think it's true for painting. I think it's true for music, for any other art form. And yet for some reason, I think that literature readers tend to shy away from heavy criticism. I think that things like this only contribute to this kind of culture that I'm seeing of not wanting to criticize books really heavily. And I think it comes from a place of respect, of wanting to respect artists, which I think is kind and generous and nice. But this is art. It's funny to me because it's like, have you ever talked to a painter about other painters? They will destroy them. Try to mention someone like Jeff Koons to an artist. Like if I just Google like Jeff Koons opinions, a genius or overrated, does anyone like him? Stop hating. Why is it controversial? His art explained. I mean, these are the types of things that you see about bland corporate art. So why do we not call it out when we see bland corporate writing? Another piece of this is, and I know it's a bit of a slippery slope argument, but whatever. When we accept things like hidden ghostwriters in novels, there's nothing in between that and using AI writers. And that's coming. It's around the corner. And if I were a public figure, I wouldn't really be going around defending ghostwriting. I would be against it, except in the most clear and called out situations. All right, let's end that there. Let's move into our second segment. We have Chimamanda Adichie, who gave a interesting interview to The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago. It is causing quite the stir. She claimed that we are looking at the end of curiosity, creativity, and even learning as writers and as readers.
Wow.
This is not her first time in hot water for her comments, and we will get into that. But just to start with a little overview, if you don't know who Adichie is, she is a Nigerian writer. She's written 3 books, 2 of which I've read. I would say that these are books that you read not necessarily for the quality of prose, which is totally fine, so much as for the perspective that she is providing. And I think that perspective is definitely incredibly valuable. I mean, I learned so much about Nigeria and Nigeria's civil war and politics. These are all things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. So that's one of the amazing things that reading can do. You know, it's not all about being the greatest writer in the world. I think that having a diversity of experiences is also an incredibly valuable way to contribute to the art form. This interview is not her first time in hot water. Like I said, Adichie made headlines a while back for backing J.K. Rowling's transphobic and pro-TERF comments. Well, since then, she's doubled down really, really heavily on those comments. Yeah, so here we have a quote from Adichie. So somebody who looks like my brother, he says, I'm a woman, walks into the women's bathroom, and a woman goes, you're not supposed to be here. And she's transphobic. So then once she got hate for those transphobic comments, she became a anti-cancel culture warrior. She actually hasn't published fiction in I think 10 years because she's been so busy giving reactionary interviews like this one. Yeah, so I'm not going to cover the anti-trans part of this interview. She does make points elsewhere here that I think are more interesting, not because I agree with them, but because they highlight the culture war that is absolutely raging in the literary community. As part of her anti-cancel culture crusading, she claims that writers are writing from more narrow perspectives. She thinks that they are afraid of stepping outside of the box of their own individual experiences because they might get slapped by the intolerant left.
The idea that I'm seen as a fierce defender of the freedom to express oneself is not really, I don't want to be that, but it feels important to talk about because I think...
So write a book. Go back to fiction. I hate when people say this shit.
I think there's a problem with the way that we're living now. Right? So this Ayad Akhtar, who's a writer I really admire, he calls it his...
Good writer. That's one thing she is right about. Homeland Elegies, good read. Would recommend.
That there's a moral stridency. People are afraid. And because people are afraid, people self-censor. They don't say, so that the single story, they then impose it on themselves. I think it happens with publishing. I think it happens in politics.
Yeah, so she's not the first person to make this point. I mean, Zadiesmith has been talking a lot about this recently. I do think a lot of authors feel this pressure. And Adichie says she works with a lot of young writers, which I believe, in workshops, and she says she sees them not just self-censoring, but also censoring each other, which I also believe. I mean, I took a bunch of writing courses in college, and there definitely was, that student that would bring it up if you were writing from different perspectives. A lot of the stuff Adichie says is really dumb, but I don't think that this is like a totally untrue point, that there is backlash to writing from perspectives that aren't yours. But I think the dumb part about it is that in this entire video, she is like calling for people to change the way they react to things, which I don't think is the approach that makes sense. This idea of cancel culture being like a real comprehensive thing is absolutely absurd. It is a loose idea. People that ignore cancellation and just blow past it and re-engage with their core community tend to have absolutely no problems. I don't think you should spend a lot of time arguing about like the hypothetical concepts of what may or may not happen if you do something. I think you should just do it. Adichie is a best-selling writer. Zadiesmith is a best-selling writer. These people do not face actual complications to their work based on the idea of like liberal cancellation or censorship or any of these things. These are immaterial to the actual reality of what is happening to them. To get caught up on it is childish. You have so many supporters. When you put yourself out there into the world, you have to accept detractors. This is a part of being someone that creates art. The people that say that you aren't allowed to write from a certain perspective are no different from people that say that your writing is bad. If you don't take that side of things seriously, then why do you have to take the side of what you would call political censorship seriously? What you do is up to you. And I find these boomers complaining about what people say very boring when it doesn't actually affect anything. Okay, so this happened while I was editing, but it's too perfect not to include. Salman Rushdie talking about the exact same thing that Adichie and Zadiesmith have talked about, which is allowing people to write characters outside of their own personal experiences. My man wrote Midnight Children, and now he's worried about anime profile pictures canceling him on Twitter. He has a literal fatwa out on him. He got stabbed for it, and he's afraid of people with anime profile pictures. What a world.
So you were telling me backstage that you don't read much, or you don't. I imagine.
I'm constantly buying books, and I do try to, and I do that because I'm thinking about when I started and how terrified I was that nobody would buy my books.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to buy, especially first novels. You know, I just go and I buy them, and I almost never finish them.
But is there a
No, it's true.
Is there some sort of consistent thing that you're saying, oh, here we go again, you know, like, or
Yes,
something that you're bumping up against as a reader?
I remember recently reading this book, and I thought, my God, everybody is good in this book. And that's a lie. I mean, you know, but it's true. The thing about being human, and this is what literature should do for us, it should show us all sides of ourselves.
Right.
And I read this book, and everyone was good, and everyone was ideologically correct.
So this is a point that I find more interesting. So Adichie says essentially that she finds contemporary fiction uninteresting because the characters are too polished, too morally righteous, too morally just. I don't necessarily agree with all of those points, but I do agree that there is something about contemporary modern fiction that I also find uninteresting and unengaging. I think that one explanation for that is that when you look at any era of writing or reading, you only look at the best parts of it. And so the boring books, which constitute a vast majority of what is actually put out there, fall to the wayside, and you don't end up reading those. And I think that's true, but there's also clearly a resurgence in reading's popularity that is currently ongoing, and it is primarily driven by social media. And I think that that is having an effect on what exactly is being written and read in the world. I think that things are more trend oriented. I think that books are becoming another form of content. Books become shows or movies overnight. They can blow up on TikTok. I think social media creates a phenomenon where individuals have more reach than they have ever had. People learn how to read and how to criticize from social media websites and through, like Jackedwards was saying, heavily marketed celebrity books, which are now more possible and easier to create than ever, and have also become things that are not relegated to only the most popular celebrities, but can also be ways to access your favorite vlogger or Twitch streamer or president or whatever. And this doesn't mean that I think there's not great literary fiction currently being published. I definitely think there is. What it means is that I think we're kind of removing what I would think of as the literary middle class, which is kind of what I think of myself as. I don't like to read a lot of casual books, but I'm also not going to sit around and try to get through V or Gravity's Rainbow. I'm not going to read the recognitions. You know, I don't fool myself into thinking that I'm going to read Finnegan's Wake. At the same time, I don't want things that are easily digested. I do want some challenges, and that's kind of what I think of as literary middle class. And I think that the world is separating more into the lower class of reading, which is these types of like celebrity ghostwriting types of books, and then higher class. Right now, let's say like Eastern European writers are very, very popular. So those type of like Eastern European, you know, Pulitzer, Nobel winner type authors. I think it's harder and harder to find things that are middle of the road, which is how I would describe myself and a lot of other readers that I relate to. All right, so last segment I wanted to get to is literature prizes. So we had a couple. We had the announcement of the 2023 Nobel Prize in Literature. This was taken home by Jon Fosse, who is a Norwegian author. We had the National Book Award finalists announced. There are 5 of them. And then one of them is in common with the Man Booker shortlist, and it's This Other Eden by Paul Harding. I'm not an award guru. I do not try to read all of the books on any of these awards lists, and honestly, I've heard of some of these authors, but not most of them. I think who exactly is getting these awards is interesting, so let's talk through that a little, maybe like a bit of the reputational stuff about these awards. So starting with the Nobel, which I think of as the biggest deal of these 3. Nobel Prize going to a Norwegian is not exactly surprising. It is a Swedish prize, and it tends to go to countries in that region. So Western Europe, Scandinavia, these are common targets for the Nobel Prize. So Norway is directly in that wheelhouse. Now, the Booker Prize used to be Commonwealth only. So, you know, South Africa, UK, Canada. I think there's another, but I can't remember. It is no longer Commonwealth only. It hasn't been since I think like 2014. The current scope is English language only. It's definitely like the most Western European and American type prize, of course, excluding the National Book Award. And then the National Book Award is, of course, only American novels. Yeah, what's really of interest to me is that I've never really heard of any of these people, save for one or two of them. Some of these novels are debuts, so it makes sense that I haven't heard of them, but a lot of these people have been around for a while. And it kind of highlights to me the literature upper and lower class aspect of things that I was talking about. What we're looking at here, especially with the Nobel Prize, is the true upper class of literature. I mean, these are obscure authors that are not necessarily the most accessible. I just think it's interesting that these aren't people that I, a dedicated reader and someone who actually tries hard to stay up to date on what is going on, I think it's interesting that I haven't really heard of these people. Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about highbrow, look at this guy. Come on. This is not my guy. Cool, so that's going to be the October wrap-up. I'm hoping that this can spark discussion. There are people on the internet and people that watch these videos that know a hell of a lot more on these topics than I do. So I'm definitely open to any feedback or ideas that you have. So feel free to drop a comment. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Let me know if you like the kind of more informal aspect of it. And I'll keep making these. Peace, nerds.